I pulled into my driveway in Scottsdale after 2 weeks away, exhausted from the red-eye flight from Dallas. The Arizona heat hit me like a wall even at 8 p.m. in September, but something felt wrong immediately. Dead wrong. The house was completely dark, not a single light on anywhere. Sarah always kept the living room lights on, especially with her condition. Even when she got confused about other things, she remembered that one rule I'd drilled into her. Keep the lights on so you don't get disoriented. My name is Stephen Henderson. I'm 58 years old, and after 20 years in the Navy, followed by 15 years as a Boeing engineer working on military aircraft systems, I've developed what you might call a sixth sense for when something's not right. Right now, every instinct I'd honed during my years aboard destroyers in the Persian Gulf was screaming at me. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine still running, scanning the house. The neighbors' places glowed with warm light. The Johnsons watching their evening news. The Garcias probably having dinner on their back patio. But my house looked abandoned, empty, wrong. Sarah has early onset dementia. She's 55, my wife of 32 years, and until 2 years ago, she was one of the sharpest pediatric nurses at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Kids loved her because she could make them laugh even when they were scared. But this disease has been stealing pieces of her mind, bit by bit. Some days she's almost her old self. Other days she can't remember how to work the microwave. The one thing that terrified her most about the dementia was getting lost in her own house at night. So we'd established routines, simple ones. Keep the living room lights on from sunset to bedtime. Leave the hallway light on all night. Keep her cell phone charging on the kitchen counter where she could always find it. None of that was happening now. I grabbed my duffel bag from the truck bed, the same canvas bag I'd carried through 3 deployments, and headed for the front door. That's when I heard it. A faint thumping sound, rhythmic and desperate, coming from somewhere inside the house. Not the random settling sounds an empty house makes. This was deliberate, frantic. My blood turned to ice water. I'd spent 2 weeks in Dallas at my mother's bedside after she'd suffered a massive stroke. At 83, she'd fought through the worst of it, and her doctors finally said she was stable enough for me to come home. I'd been worried sick about leaving Sarah, even though our daughter Jessica had volunteered immediately to stay with her. "Dad, don't worry about anything," Jessica had said when I was packing for the emergency flight. "I'll take care of Mom. You just focus on Grandma." Jessica knew Sarah's routines better than anyone. She's 32, works as a real estate agent here in Phoenix, and had been incredibly supportive since Sarah's diagnosis. Or so I thought. I shoved my key in the front door lock, hands shaking despite my military training. The thumping sound was clearer now. Someone was banging on something from below. From the basement. But we rarely used the basement. It was mostly storage, too hot in the Arizona climate to be comfortable. The door swung open and I dropped my bag immediately. The silence inside was wrong. No TV murmuring in the background. No sound of Sarah humming to herself, which she did when she was content. Just that desperate banging from downstairs. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice echoing in the dark house. "Sarah, where are you?" I flicked on the living room light and quickly scanned the space. Sarah's reading glasses weren't on the side table where she always left them. Her crossword puzzle books weren't scattered on the coffee table. The TV remote was sitting on the couch, but Sarah never left it there. She always put it back on the coffee table because that's where remotes belong. The banging from the basement got louder, more frantic. Someone had heard my voice. I ran to the basement door and grabbed the handle. Locked. Not just locked, padlocked with a heavy-duty lock I'd never seen before in my life. The kind of lock you'd use on a storage unit or a shed where you kept valuable tools. Not the kind of lock you'd ever put on an interior door in your own home. "Sarah!" I shouted, pressing my ear to the door. "Sarah, is that you?" A weak cry came from the other side. Barely audible, but definitely Sarah's voice. She was trying to say something, but I couldn't make out the words. I ran to the garage, muscle memory from my Navy days kicking in. When you hear distress calls, you respond immediately and you respond with the right tools. I grabbed the largest crowbar I owned, a 36-inch Johnson bar I'd bought years ago for demolition work when we'd renovated the kitchen. Back at the basement door, I jammed the crowbar into the lock mechanism and put my full weight behind it. The first yank loosened it, the second yank bent the metal, the third yank snapped it completely. The door swung open and the smell hit me like a physical blow. Urine, sweat, and something else, something sour and sick that made me gag. In 20 years of Navy service, I'd smelled some awful things. engine rooms flooded with sewage, galley grease traps in 100-degree heat, even a shipmate who died in his bunk and wasn't found for 2 days. This was worse because I knew, even before I saw her, that the smell was connected to my wife. I flicked on the basement light and nearly collapsed. Sarah was at the bottom of the stairs, sitting on the concrete floor in what had once been her pink nightgown. Now it was stained brown and yellow and torn in several places. Her gray hair, usually so carefully styled, hung in greasy strings around her face. She was thin, dangerously thin. Her cheekbones stood out sharp and her arms looked like sticks, but it was her eyes that broke my heart. When the light came on, she looked up at me with pure confusion and terror, like a wounded animal that didn't understand why it was in pain. "Stephen?" Her voice was barely a whisper, raw and cracked. Is that really you? Or am I dreaming again?" I was down those stairs in 3 seconds flat, my knees hitting the concrete hard enough to bruise, but I didn't care. I scooped her into my arms, and she weighed almost nothing. Sarah used to be solid, not heavy, but substantial. A woman who could lift a 40-pound child out of a hospital bed without breaking a sweat. Now she felt like I was holding a bundle of kindling. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe now." She started crying then, not the gentle tears of relief, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone who'd been terrified for so long they'd forgotten what safety felt like. As I held her, I looked around the basement with growing horror. In the corner was a plastic bucket, the kind you'd buy at Home Depot for mixing paint. From the smell, I knew immediately what it had been used for. Next to it was a thin blanket, the kind of cheap thing you might keep in your car for emergencies. It was dirty and damp. That was it. No food containers, no water bottles, no pillow, nothing that suggested human comfort or care. The light bulb socket above us was empty. Someone had removed the bulb, leaving Sarah in complete darkness. I carried her upstairs, and she clung to me like a child, her fingers digging into my shirt. In the living room, I laid her gently on the couch and grabbed my cell phone with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? This is Stephen Henderson at 847 East Desert Hills Drive in Scottsdale. I need paramedics immediately. My wife has been... I stopped. How do you explain this? My wife has been locked in our basement. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished. Sir, did you say locked in your basement? Yes. Someone padlocked the door from the outside. She's been trapped down there. I don't know for how long. We're dispatching paramedics and police immediately. Stay on the line with me. Is your wife conscious? I looked at Sarah, who was staring at me with those confused, frightened eyes. Yes, she's conscious, but she has dementia and she's in bad shape. Really bad shape. What's your wife's name and age? Sarah Henderson. She's 55. As I gave information to the dispatcher, I looked around the house more carefully. Everything seemed wrong. The furniture had been moved. Not a lot, but enough that I noticed. There were boxes stacked in the corner near the kitchen that I'd never seen before. Sarah's daily pill organizer, which usually sat on the kitchen counter right next to the coffee maker, was gone. The refrigerator was nearly empty except for some takeout containers and beer. Sarah didn't drink beer. I didn't keep beer in the house because Sarah's dementia medications didn't mix well with alcohol. Sir, can you tell me when you last saw your wife? 2 weeks ago. I left her with our daughter while I flew to Dallas. My mother had a stroke. My voice started to break. I left her with Jessica. Our daughter was supposed to be taking care of her. What's your daughter's name? Jessica Henderson. She's 32. She lives in Tempe with her husband. Even as I answered the dispatcher's questions, my mind was racing. Where was Jessica? If she'd been staying here to care for Sarah, where were her things? Where was her car? I hadn't seen Jessica's white Honda Accord in the driveway. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock, another Navy habit. When you're in crisis, you track time. You track details. You document everything because later, when people ask questions, you need to have answers. 2 paramedics came through the front door with their equipment. The older one, a woman probably in her 40s, took one look at Sarah and her expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm Jennifer with the Scottsdale Fire Department. Can you tell me your name?" "Sarah," my wife whispered. "Sarah Henderson. Is Stephen home? I've been waiting for Stephen." "I'm here, sweetheart," I said, taking her hand. "I'm right here." The paramedic started checking Sarah's vital signs while her partner, A younger guy asked me questions. "Sir, when did you last see your wife?" 2 weeks ago. I've been in Dallas. And she's been alone this entire time?" "No." I felt sick saying it. "Our daughter was supposed to be staying with her." The paramedics exchanged a look that I caught immediately. In the Navy, you learn to read people's faces, especially when they're trying to hide something from you. These two had seen abuse before. They knew what they were looking at. "Sir," the female paramedic said carefully, "your wife is severely dehydrated. Her blood pressure is dangerously low, and she's showing signs of prolonged malnutrition. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." "How long?" I asked. "How long would someone have to be without proper food and water to look like this?" She hesitated. "I can't make that determination, sir. The doctors will need to assess her." But I could see it in her eyes. Days. Multiple days. Maybe a week or more. They loaded Sarah onto a stretcher, and she kept reaching for my hand. "Don't leave me again," she whispered. "Please don't leave me again. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I'm riding with you." In the ambulance, I held Sarah's hand while the paramedic started an IV. She was so dehydrated that it took 3 tries to find a vein. Sarah barely flinched. She was too weak to react properly to pain. "Stephen," she said, her voice so quiet I had to lean close to hear her. "I called for you. Every day I called for you. Where were you?" "I was in Dallas taking care of Grandma, remember?" "She had a stroke." Sarah looked confused. "Dallas? When did you go to Dallas?" Her short-term memory was worse than when I'd left. The stress had accelerated her cognitive decline, just like her neurologist had warned us it would. Dr. Martinez had been very clear. People with dementia need routine, stability, familiar surroundings. Trauma and stress could cause rapid deterioration. At Banner Desert Medical Center, they rushed Sarah straight into the emergency department. While the medical team worked on her, a nurse pulled me aside for intake information. "Mr. Henderson, I need to ask some questions. Has your wife been locked in that basement for the entire time you were away?" The way she asked it, not if, but how long, told me everything. They'd seen this before, elder abuse. The thought made me physically sick. "I don't know," I said. "I just found her like that. My daughter was supposed to be staying with her. Where is your daughter now? I have no idea." That's when it really hit me. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Jessica's number. It went straight to voicemail. Not the usual 4 rings, but straight to an automated message. Her phone was either dead or turned off. I tried calling the house phone at her condo in Tempe. No answer. I tried calling her work number at Desert Sun Realty. A receptionist answered. "Hi, this is Stephen Henderson, Jessica Henderson's father. Is she available?" "Oh, Mr. Henderson, Jessica's been out of the office for about 10 days now. She said she had a family emergency." 10 days? "Yes, sir. She said she'd be back next week. Is everything okay?" I hung up without answering. 10 days out of work, 2 weeks since I'd left for Dallas. The math was starting to add up in a way that made my stomach turn. An hour later, while Sarah was getting fluids and the doctors were running tests, a police officer arrived. Detective Patrick Sullivan from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Elder Abuse Unit. He was probably in his mid-40s with the kind of serious expression that told me he'd seen enough human cruelty to last several lifetimes. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Detective Sullivan. I understand you found your wife locked in your basement." We sat in the hospital waiting room, and I told him everything. My Navy background, my job at Boeing, Sarah's dementia diagnosis, my mother's stroke in Dallas, Jessica volunteering to stay with Sarah. "Tell me about your daughter," Sullivan said, taking notes. "Jessica's 32. She works in real estate here in Phoenix. She's been struggling a bit lately. The market's been tough with the interest rates. She married Andrew Martinez about 4 years ago. What does Andrew do? He calls himself a day trader. Always talking about cryptocurrency, options trading, get-rich-quick schemes. I never really trusted him, but Jessica seemed happy enough. Any financial problems that you know of?" I thought about that. Jessica mentioned a few months ago that their commissions were way down. Real estate's been brutal lately. "And Andrew?" I paused. Andrew always seemed like he was chasing the next big score, always had some new investment strategy he was excited about. Detective Sullivan made more notes. "Mr. Henderson, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. During the time you were away, did you give your daughter power of attorney over your wife's affairs?" "No, absolutely not. Why would I do that? Did your wife sign any legal documents that you're aware of?" "Not that I know of." A cold feeling was spreading through my chest. "Detective, what exactly are you thinking happened here?" He looked at me directly. "Mr. Henderson, what I'm thinking is that your wife wasn't just neglected. Someone deliberately locked her in that basement. And based on what you're telling me about your daughter's absence, this wasn't an accident." The weight of what he was suggesting hit me like a sledgehammer. "You think Jessica did this intentionally?" "I think we need to investigate very carefully. Can you give me Jessica and Andrew's address?" I gave Detective Sullivan Jessica and Andrew's address in Tempe, a condo complex called Desert Vista, about 25 minutes from our house. He made some calls, and within an hour I could see patrol cars heading in that direction from the hospital parking lot. Sarah was stable, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. The IV fluids were helping, but the doctors were concerned about kidney function and wanted to monitor her electrolyte levels. She was sleeping when I left, finally looking peaceful for the first time since I'd found her. "I'll stay here with her," said my neighbor Mrs. Johnson, who'd arrived after hearing the ambulance. Eleanor Johnson was 72, a retired teacher who'd become close friends with Sarah over the years. "You go do what you need to do, Stephen. We'll take good care of her." Detective Sullivan called me as I was driving home. "Mr. Henderson, we're at your daughter's condo. You need to hear this. What did you find?" "They're gone. The place is cleaned out. Most of the furniture is still here, but personal belongings, clothes, electronics, all gone. And we found some things in the trash that are very concerning." "What kind of things?" "Bank statements, printouts of flight information, and what looks like rental agreements for property in Belize. We're processing it all as evidence, but, Mr. Henderson, it appears your daughter and son-in-law were planning to leave the country." Belize, a country with limited extradition treaties. My daughter wasn't just missing, she was running. "There's more," Sullivan continued. "We found a laptop bag with some documents they must have missed. There are what appear to be power of attorney forms with your wife's signature and bank transfer records. Large amounts of money, Mr. Henderson. We need to get a forensic accountant involved, but this looks like financial exploitation." I pulled over to the side of the road. Financial exploitation. They hadn't just locked Sarah in the basement out of negligence or panic. They'd done it to steal from us. "Detective, I need to go through my house carefully. If they forged documents, there might be more evidence there. That's exactly what we need to do. Meet me at your house in 30 minutes. Don't touch anything until I get there." I sat in my truck for a few minutes, trying to process what was happening. Jessica, the little girl who used to help Sarah plant flowers in our garden, who'd cried when she accidentally stepped on a bug, had locked her own mother in a basement to steal our life savings. Back at the house, I waited for Detective Sullivan before going inside. When he arrived with a crime scene technician, we started with the basement. In daylight, or rather in proper artificial light, it was even worse than I'd remembered. The concrete floor was stained with urine. There were scratch marks on the door where Sarah had tried to claw her way out. "Mr. Henderson, how long would your wife have been able to survive under these conditions?" Sullivan asked. I thought about Sarah's medical condition, her medications, her physical state. Not long. She needs to eat regularly because of her dementia medications. And without water, I couldn't finish the sentence. If you hadn't come home when you did, she would have died, probably within another day or two. We went upstairs to search the main house. In the kitchen, I found Jessica's laptop still sitting on the table. The password screen was up, but when I touched the mouse, it came to life. She'd saved her password. "Don't touch anything else," Sullivan said. "We'll need to have our cybercrimes unit examine this properly, but just from what I can see on the screen, there are documents here we need to look at. Even without touching the computer, I could see file names on the desktop that made my blood run cold. POA documents final, bank transfer confirmations, and Belize property rental." In the living room, I noticed something else. Sarah's purse was missing from its usual spot on the hall table. Her checkbook, which she kept in the kitchen drawer, was gone. Her medication organizer was nowhere to be found. They cleaned out anything that could identify her, I realized. If something happened to Sarah, there'd be no immediate way to contact her doctors. No medication list for paramedics, nothing. "Mr. Henderson, I think you need to check your financial accounts immediately. If they had power of attorney documents with your wife's signature, they may have accessed your bank accounts." I called our bank, Wells Fargo, where we'd been customers for 15 years. After going through security verification, I spoke with a manager named Patricia Williams. "Ms. Williams, I need to check for any unusual activity on our accounts over the past 2 weeks." There was a pause. Mr. Henderson, I see several large withdrawals and a home equity line of credit that was opened 10 days ago. The total amount moved was just over $200,000. I nearly dropped the phone. $200,000? Yes, sir. The withdrawals were authorized with power of attorney documentation that we have on file. The HELOC was for $75,000, and the cash withdrawals from your savings totaled $125,000. Our entire life savings. Gone. Ms. Williams, I never authorized power of attorney for anyone. My wife has dementia. She couldn't have legally signed those documents. Another pause. Mr. Henderson, I think you need to come in immediately. And you should probably bring a lawyer. I looked at Detective Sullivan, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation. Detective, they stole everything. Our whole life savings. $200,000. Sullivan nodded grimly. Mr. Henderson, we need to examine that laptop immediately. Can you walk me through your typical financial situation so I understand what they had access to? I explained our finances while the crime scene tech photographed everything. After 35 years of steady work, 20 in the Navy, 15 at Boeing, Sarah and I had been careful savers. The $125,000 in our savings account represented my entire Boeing 401k that I'd rolled over when I retired 3 years ago, plus years of putting away Sarah's nursing income. The house had been paid off for 5 years, which is why the $75,000 home equity line of credit was so devastating. We'd gone from owning our home free and clear to having a mortgage payment again. That money was supposed to last us through retirement, I told Sullivan. More importantly, it was Sarah's security. When her dementia gets worse, and it will get worse, she's going to need memory care. That costs $6,000 to $8,000 a month in Phoenix. We were planning ahead. Sullivan nodded. Let's see what they were planning. The cybercrimes technician, a young woman named Officer Martinez, pulled up Jessica's laptop files. What we found made me physically sick. Mr. Henderson, you need to see this, she said, pointing to a text message thread between Jessica and Andrew. The messages went back 3 weeks, starting even before my mother's stroke. Jessica, Dad's talking about updating their estate planning. We need to move faster. Andrew, how much do you think they have? Jessica, at least $150K in savings, plus the house is worth $350K, no mortgage. Andrew, that would cover my trading losses and give us a fresh start. Jessica, Mom's getting worse. Dad's stressed about long-term care costs. This might be our only chance. I stared at the screen, reading my daughter discussing my wife like she was a financial opportunity. Keep scrolling, Sullivan said quietly. The messages continued. Andrew, what if your dad doesn't go to Dallas? Jessica, he will. Grandma's his priority and he feels guilty about not visiting more. If something happens to her, he'll drop everything. Andrew, and your mom? Jessica, she trusts me completely. With her dementia, she gets confused about signing things anyway. Dad handles all the finances now. They'd been waiting for the right opportunity. My mother's stroke hadn't just been convenient. They'd been counting on something like it happening. The messages from after I left for Dallas were worse. Day 2, Jessica. Got Mom to the notary. She signed everything. Told her it was insurance paperwork for Dad. Andrew, how did she seem? Jessica, confused but cooperative. She kept asking when Dad would be home. Andrew, perfect. How much can we access? Jessica, all of it, savings, checking, and I can open a HELOC with the POA. Day 5, Andrew. She's asking too many questions about you being here. Wants to call your dad. Jessica, can't let that happen. He'd know something was wrong. Andrew, so what do we do? Jessica, basement, just until we get the money transferred and get out. Andrew, are you serious? Jessica, she'll be fine for a few days. The confusion actually helps. She won't remember exactly when things happened. Andrew, what about food? Jessica, we'll figure it out. They never figured it out. There was no follow-up about food or water or checking on her. They'd locked Sarah in that basement and forgotten about her while they focused on stealing our money. Day 8, Andrew. Belize rental confirmed. Flight leaves Saturday. Jessica, good. The HELOC cleared. Total haul is $200K. Andrew, what about your mom? Jessica, what about her? Andrew, we can't just leave her down there. Jessica. Dad comes back Sunday, he'll find her. Andrew. What if she doesn't make it that long? Jessica. Then it's a tragic accident. Confused elderly woman wandered into basement, door closed behind her. Shit happens. I had to walk away from the laptop. This wasn't desperation or panic or a terrible mistake. This was cold, calculated murder. My daughter was willing to let her mother die to steal our retirement savings. Sullivan put his hand on my shoulder. Mr. Henderson, I know this is hard to read, but we need to see all of it. There was more. Jessica had researched power of attorney laws in Arizona. She'd found a notary who didn't ask many questions. She'd researched countries with limited extradition treaties. She'd even looked up accidental death and elderly dementia wandering on Google. The laptop also showed Andrew's trading account. He'd lost $47,000 in the past 6 months on cryptocurrency and options trades. But the real shock came when Officer Martinez found a folder labeled Martinez Capital Management. Mr. Henderson, it looks like your son-in-law was running an investment scam. He was taking money from other people too, promising high returns on crypto trades. Andrew wasn't just a failed day trader. He was running a Ponzi scheme. The laptop showed at least 12 other investors, mostly elderly people from Jessica's real estate contacts. He'd promised them 25% annual returns on cryptocurrency investments that never actually happened. He was just shuffling money around, paying old investors with new investor money. Our $200,000 wasn't going to fund their escape to Belize. It was going to cover Andrew's trading losses and keep his fraud scheme running a little longer. How many other people did they steal from? I asked. Officer Martinez kept scrolling through files. Based on what I'm seeing here, at least $400,000 from other victims. Your money was just the latest. Jessica hadn't just betrayed her own family. She'd helped Andrew target vulnerable elderly people through her real estate connections. She'd used her professional reputation to lend credibility to his scam. Detective, I said, I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This wasn't just elder abuse or financial exploitation. This was attempted murder. Sullivan immediately called for backup and issued an APB for Jessica and Andrew. Within 2 hours, their photos were on every law enforcement database in Arizona, and alerts had gone out to airports, border crossings, and bus stations throughout the Southwest. Mr. Henderson, Sullivan said, based on the evidence we've found, we're issuing arrest warrants for your daughter and son-in-law on multiple charges: elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and conspiracy. Given the Ponzi scheme aspect, we're also bringing in the FBI for the interstate financial crimes. FBI involvement meant this was serious federal crime territory. Good. I wanted every resource available thrown at finding them. The media picked up the story within hours. Daughter and son-in-law wanted in elder abuse case ran on every local Phoenix news station that evening. Jessica's real estate headshot photo and Andrew's driver's license picture were broadcast across the state. The story had everything local news loved: family betrayal, elderly victim, financial fraud, and an attempted escape to a foreign country. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters wanting statements, neighbors expressing shock and support, former colleagues from Boeing checking if I needed help. I ignored most of it, but I did answer when Eleanor Johnson called from the hospital. Stephen, Sarah's asking for you. She's more alert now that she's hydrated, but she's agitated. She keeps saying she needs to warn you about something. I drove back to the hospital immediately. Sarah was sitting up in bed, looking more like herself than she had in months. The IV fluids and a proper meal had made an incredible difference. Stephen, she said as soon as she saw me, I need to tell you something important. About Jessica. What about Jessica, sweetheart? She did something bad. She took my purse and made me sign papers. I told her no, but she said you said it was okay. Sarah's eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. Sometimes extreme stress can actually create moments of clarity in dementia patients. What kind of papers? Bank papers. She said it was so you could pay for my doctor visits while you were gone. But Stephen, I know our bank account numbers. I used to be a nurse. I'm good with numbers. She wrote down different numbers. Even with her cognitive decline, Sarah's nursing background had kicked in. She'd noticed the discrepancy. Did you tell Jessica you noticed? Yes. That's when she got angry. She said I was confused and couldn't remember things correctly anymore. She said Andrew was going to help me downstairs to rest, and then... Sarah started to cry. Then it was dark for so long. I called for you every day. I held her hand. You did good noticing those numbers, sweetheart. You helped catch them. 2 days later, Detective Sullivan called with news. We got them. Jessica and Andrew Martinez were arrested at Sky Harbor Airport trying to board a flight to Mexico City. TSA flagged them when they tried to check in. Mexico City? First leg to Belize. They had connecting flights booked through Mexico. We also found $23,000 in cash in their luggage and evidence they'd been staying at a hotel near the airport for the past 3 days. They'd been hiding 20 miles from where they'd left Sarah to die, waiting for their flight out of the country. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. I took a sick day from dealing with insurance companies and banks to attend. Sarah was still in the hospital but improving daily, so Eleanor Johnson offered to stay with her again. The Maricopa County Courthouse was busier than I expected. Jessica and Andrew's case had attracted attention from local news stations, and there were reporters with cameras outside the building. I tried to avoid them, but one caught up with me in the parking lot. "Mr. Henderson, how do you feel about your daughter's arrest?" "I feel like justice is being served," I said and kept walking. Inside the courthouse, I sat in the back row of the gallery. When they brought Jessica and Andrew in wearing orange jumpsuits and shackles, I barely recognized my daughter. She looked thin and tired, her hair unwashed, nothing like the confident real estate agent who'd been featured in Desert Sun Realty's advertising just months before. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Michelle Roberts from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, laid out the charges: elder abuse, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, unlawful imprisonment, fraud over $100,000, conspiracy, and money laundering. For Andrew, there were additional charges related to his Ponzi scheme, securities fraud and theft from multiple elderly victims. Jessica's court-appointed attorney argued for reasonable bail. "Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record, strong ties to the community through her real estate career, and a family member willing to provide housing." He gestured toward me in the gallery. I stood up. "Your Honor," I said, "I am not willing to provide housing or support for the defendant." She locked my wife in our basement for 14 days while stealing our life savings. "As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a daughter." The judge looked surprised. It's apparently unusual for family members to actively oppose bail for their relatives. Michelle Roberts argued against bail more forcefully. "Your Honor, the defendants were arrested attempting to flee the country with evidence of long-term planning to permanently relocate to Belize. They pose an extreme flight risk. Additionally, the victim in this case, the defendant's own mother, nearly died as a result of their actions." Ms. Henderson locked a confused elderly woman with dementia in a basement without food or water for 2 weeks. This shows a callous disregard for human life that makes the defendants dangerous to the community. Andrew's lawyer tried to paint him as a victim too. "Your Honor, Mr. Martinez was clearly under the influence of Ms. Henderson, who initiated this plan and convinced him to participate against his better judgment. The judge wasn't buying it." "Mr. Martinez, the evidence shows you were the architect of a larger fraud scheme that targeted multiple elderly victims. You used your wife's real estate connections to identify and exploit vulnerable people. This court finds both defendants to be extreme flight risks with no regard for public safety. Bail is denied." Jessica started crying when the judge announced the decision. She turned around to look at me, mouthing, "Dad, please help me." I stood up and walked out without looking back. Outside the courthouse, Michelle Roberts caught up with me. "Mr. Henderson, I want you to know we're pursuing maximum sentences. Based on the evidence and the number of victims involved, Jessica could face 15 to 20 years, Andrew potentially 25 to 30. "Good," I said. "What about restitution?" "We'll pursue full restitution, but realistically, the money is gone. Andrew's trading losses and the money paid to earlier investors in his Ponzi scheme consumed most of it. You might recover 10 to 15 cents on the dollar, if you're lucky. So not only had they tried to kill Sarah, they'd successfully destroyed our financial security for retirement. 35 years of careful saving, gone. The months leading up to the trial were the hardest of my life, and I'd survived 2 combat deployments in the Persian Gulf. Sarah came home from the hospital after 6 days, but she wasn't the same person. The trauma had accelerated her dementia significantly. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, her neurologist, explained it to me bluntly during a follow-up appointment. "Stephen, extreme stress and trauma can cause rapid cognitive decline in dementia patients. Sarah's brain was already vulnerable, and what she experienced, the isolation, fear, physical deprivation, created additional neurological damage. We're seeing about 18 months of progression compressed into 2 weeks. What that meant practically was devastating. Sarah, who had been able to manage most daily activities with reminders, now needed constant supervision. She'd forgotten how to use the microwave. She got lost going from the bedroom to the bathroom, a path she'd walked thousands of times in our 15 years in this house. Most heartbreakingly, she sometimes forgot who I was. "Who are you?" she asked me one morning, looking at me with genuine fear. "What are you doing in my house?" "I'm Steven, sweetheart. I'm your husband." "No," she said, backing away from me. Steven went to Dallas. Jessica said he wasn't coming back. It took me 2 hours to convince her that I was really Steven, that I had come back from Dallas, and that she was safe. Even then, she remained agitated for the rest of the day. I had to hire a full-time caregiver, which created another financial burden we couldn't afford. Maria Gonzalez, a certified nurse's aide, cost $18 an hour for 8 hours a day. That's $3,600 a month, and Sarah needed supervision beyond those 8 hours too. Our financial situation was catastrophic. The $200,000 Jessica and Andrew had stolen represented our entire retirement nest egg. Worse, we now owed $75,000 on the home equity line of credit they'd opened. For the first time in 5 years, we had a mortgage payment, $480 a month, that would stretch for 15 years. My Navy pension was $2,400 a month. My Boeing pension was $2,800 a month. Sarah's nursing pension, which she'd earned over 25 years at Phoenix Children's Hospital, was $900 a month. Total, $5,100 monthly income. Our expenses now included $480 for the mortgage payment, $3,600 for Sarah's daytime caregiver, $800 for Sarah's medications, her insurance didn't cover everything, $200 for other living expenses, $400 for increased utilities, Sarah needed the house kept warm and well lit to reduce confusion, and $300 for the security system I'd installed because Sarah sometimes tried to leave the house at night. Total monthly expenses, $6,780. We were going $1,680 deeper in the hole every month, and Sarah's care needs were only going to increase. I met with our family lawyer, Daniel Walsh, about civil remedies. Daniel was a partner at Walsh & Associates, a firm that specialized in elder law and estate litigation. "Steven," he said, reviewing the police reports and financial documents, "you have an airtight case for a civil lawsuit. Beyond the stolen money, you can sue for punitive damages, emotional distress, and the cost of Sarah's accelerated care needs. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, $500,000 to $800,000. The stolen $200,000 plus punitive damages for the cruelty involved, plus the lifetime cost of Sarah's additional care needs. A jury will be sympathetic. This is every parent's nightmare. But can we actually collect anything?" Daniel was honest. "That's the challenge. Jessica and Andrew spent most of the money covering Andrew's trading losses and keeping his Ponzi scheme running. They don't have significant assets. But here's what we can do. We file the lawsuit now, get judgments against them, and put liens on any future earnings or assets they might have. If either of them ever inherits money, wins a lottery, or earns significant income after they get out of prison, we'll be first in line to collect." I authorized him to file the civil suit. It felt good to hit back, even if the practical recovery was uncertain. Meanwhile, the criminal case moved forward. Michelle Roberts, the prosecutor, met with me regularly to prepare for trial. She was confident about conviction, but wanted me to understand the challenges. "Steven, Sarah's going to have to testify. Her testimony about signing the power of attorney documents under false pretenses is crucial, but Jessica's defense attorney will argue that Sarah's dementia makes her an unreliable witness. What about the text messages? The laptop evidence? That's solid evidence of conspiracy and planning. But for the financial exploitation charges, we need Sarah to testify that she didn't understand what she was signing and that Jessica misrepresented the documents." The thought of putting Sarah through a cross-examination made me sick. In her current condition, she'd be confused and frightened by the courtroom environment. Can we do anything to make it easier for her? We can ask for accommodations, a closed courtroom, video testimony, or frequent breaks. The judge has discretion to protect vulnerable witnesses. As if the legal proceedings weren't stressful enough, I also had to deal with Jessica's attempts to contact me. She called the house collect from jail several times. I refused all the calls, but the attempts upset Sarah. Jessica keeps calling, Sarah told me one evening. She says she's sorry and wants to come home. Can she come home, Stephen? How do you explain to someone with dementia that their daughter tried to kill them? That the person calling to apologize had locked them in a basement for 2 weeks? Jessica can't come home right now, sweetheart. She's away. When will she come back? I don't know. Maybe never. Sarah looked confused and sad. Did I do something wrong? Why doesn't Jessica want to see me? These conversations broke my heart every time. Sarah's brain couldn't hold on to the reality of what Jessica had done, so she blamed herself for Jessica's absence. The stress was affecting my health too. I'd lost 15 pounds since finding Sarah in the basement. My blood pressure was elevated. I wasn't sleeping well, waking up several times a night to check on Sarah. My Navy doctor prescribed sleeping pills, but I was reluctant to take them. What if Sarah needed me during the night? Eleanor Johnson, our neighbor, had been incredibly supportive. She brought meals twice a week and sat with Sarah when I had to meet with lawyers or handle financial issues. Stephen, she said one afternoon, you need to take care of yourself too. Sarah needs you healthy for the long term. She was right, but I didn't know how to slow down. Every day felt like crisis management. Sarah's care, legal proceedings, financial stress, and the emotional weight of my daughter's betrayal. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for February, about 4 months after Sarah's rescue. As that date approached, I realized this was just the beginning of a long legal battle. The preliminary hearing in February was a nightmare I'll never forget. I had to help Sarah get dressed that morning like she was a child. Her hands shook so badly from anxiety that she couldn't button her blouse. The woman who had once managed complex medical situations with pediatric patients couldn't remember how to put on her shoes. Where are we going again? She asked for the 5th time as we drove to the courthouse. We're going to talk to a judge about what Jessica did to you. Jessica? Sarah looked confused. Is Jessica in trouble? She's a good girl, Stephen. She helps me with my medicines. Every time Sarah forgot what Jessica had done, it felt like a fresh punch to the gut. The courthouse was packed with reporters and curiosity seekers. Michelle Roberts had warned me that elder abuse cases involving family members often attracted media attention, especially when there were salacious details like cryptocurrency fraud and attempted escape to Central America. We were allowed to enter through a side entrance to avoid the cameras, but I could see the news vans lined up outside. Channel 3, Channel 12, even a crew from the Arizona Republic. My family's destruction had become entertainment. Inside the courtroom, I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. Sarah sat with Michelle Roberts and a victim's advocate named Patricia Williams, who specialized in working with cognitively impaired witnesses. When they brought Jessica into the courtroom in her orange jumpsuit, Sarah immediately brightened. Jessica, she called out, trying to stand. Jessica, honey, are you okay? Why are you wearing that orange shirt? Jessica turned around and started crying. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Sorry for what, honey? You didn't do anything wrong. The judge, the Honorable Robert Parker, had to call for order. Jessica's attorney immediately objected to Sarah testifying, arguing that her dementia made her incompetent as a witness. Your Honor, said Jessica's lawyer, a public defender named Patricia Mills, Mrs. Henderson clearly suffers from severe cognitive impairment. She cannot distinguish between reality and confusion. Her testimony would be unreliable and prejudicial. Michelle Roberts countered firmly. Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson was the victim of financial exploitation specifically because of her cognitive vulnerability. The defendant exploited her mother's condition to obtain fraudulent signatures on legal documents. The victim has the right to be heard, and she has moments of clarity where she can testify about what happened to her. Judge Parker decided to conduct a competency evaluation right there in the courtroom. He asked Sarah simple questions to assess her ability to understand what was happening. Mrs. Henderson, do you know where you are today? Sarah looked around nervously. I think I'm in court. Someone said we had to come to court. Do you know why you're here? Because of the papers. Jessica made me sign papers, but they weren't the right papers. What do you mean they weren't the right papers? Sarah's voice got stronger, more confident. Her nursing background was kicking in again. She said they were insurance forms for my doctor visits, but I know what insurance forms look like. These had bank numbers on them. Account numbers. I tried to tell her the numbers were wrong, but she said I was confused. What happened after you told Jessica the numbers were wrong? Sarah's face darkened. She got angry. She said I couldn't remember things anymore and that Stephen said it was okay. But Stephen didn't say that. Stephen would never say that. What happened next? Andrew took me downstairs. They said I needed to rest. But then Sarah started crying. Then it was dark for so long. I called for Stephen every day, but he didn't come. Jessica was sobbing in her chair. Even her attorney looked uncomfortable. Judge Parker ruled that Sarah was competent to testify about the specific events, even if her overall cognitive function was impaired. The preliminary hearing continued with Detective Sullivan presenting the evidence. He walked through the text messages between Jessica and Andrew, the financial records showing the stolen money, and the physical evidence from the basement imprisonment. Patricia Mills, Jessica's attorney, tried to argue that the text messages were taken out of context, that Jessica had been manipulated by Andrew, and that the basement confinement was never intended to cause harm. Your Honor, my client is herself a victim here. She was under severe financial and emotional pressure from her husband, who had gambling debts and was facing bankruptcy. She made terrible decisions, but they were not the decisions of a criminal mastermind. Michelle Roberts destroyed that argument on cross-examination by presenting evidence of Jessica's internet searches weeks before my mother's stroke. Jessica had researched power of attorney laws, elder exploitation statutes, and countries with limited extradition treaties. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made under pressure. It was premeditated. The most damning evidence came from Andrew's laptop, which showed that Jessica had actively helped recruit elderly investors for his Ponzi scheme through her real estate business. She'd created fake performance reports and coached Andrew on what to say to potential victims. Your Honor, Michelle Roberts argued, this wasn't a desperate daughter helping her husband. This was a calculated criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable elderly people, including her own mother. When it came time for Andrew's attorney to present his case, he threw Jessica completely under the bus. David Martinez, a private attorney Andrew's family had somehow scraped together money to hire, argued that Andrew was the real victim. Your Honor, Mr. Martinez was manipulated and controlled by Ms. Henderson, who used her knowledge of her mother's condition to plan this entire scheme. Mr. Martinez was led to believe that Mrs. Henderson had her mother's best interests at heart and that the financial transactions were legitimate. It was a coward's defense, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. Andrew was trying to save himself by blaming everything on Jessica. Judge Parker listened to all the arguments and reviewed the evidence. When he announced his decision, his voice was cold and angry. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds probable cause for all charges against both defendants. Ms. Henderson, you exploited your mother's cognitive vulnerability in the most callous way imaginable. You betrayed every bond of family trust and nearly caused your mother's death through deliberate neglect. Mr. Martinez, you orchestrated a broader pattern of financial exploitation targeting elderly victims. Both defendants will be bound over for trial. He set the trial date for September, 7 months away. As we left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions at us. I helped Sarah into our car while ignoring their calls. Sarah was exhausted and confused by the whole proceeding. Stephen, she said as we drove home, why was Jessica wearing that orange shirt? Is she in some kind of trouble? Yes, sweetheart. She's in trouble. Can we help her? She's our daughter. I didn't answer. How do you explain to someone with dementia that some things can't be forgiven? The 7 months between the preliminary hearing and the trial were the longest of my life. Every day felt like a battle on multiple fronts. Sarah's declining condition, mounting financial pressure, and the emotional weight of preparing to testify against my own daughter. Sarah's dementia continued to worsen. By May, she could no longer remember how to brush her teeth. She'd stand in the bathroom holding her toothbrush, looking at it like it was an alien object. Maria, our caregiver, had to guide her through every step of basic hygiene. More heartbreakingly, Sarah's moments of lucidity became rarer. The woman who had once managed complex medical procedures now needed help putting on her underwear, but occasionally, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, she'd have brief periods where she seemed almost like her old self. During one of these moments in June, she looked at me with clear eyes and said, "Stephen, I know what Jessica did to me. I know she locked me in the basement. I'm not as confused as everyone thinks. I know, sweetheart, that's why we're going to court." Will she go to prison? Probably, yes. Sarah nodded slowly. Good. What she did was evil. I raised her better than that. These lucid moments made everything harder, because they reminded me of the brilliant woman I was losing piece by piece. Our financial situation became desperate. By July, we were $11,000 behind on various bills. I'd maxed out our credit cards paying for Sarah's care. The home equity line of credit payment was 30 days overdue, and Wells Fargo was sending threatening letters about foreclosure proceedings. I swallowed my pride and applied for Medicaid assistance for Sarah's care. The application process was humiliating. They wanted to know why a retired Navy officer and Boeing engineer couldn't afford his wife's medical expenses. I had to explain repeatedly that our retirement savings had been stolen by our daughter. The Medicaid caseworker, a young woman named Jennifer Adams, looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. "Mr. Henderson, I have to ask, why didn't you pursue guardianship for your wife if her dementia was advanced enough for someone to exploit her financially?" It was a fair question that haunted me. I thought I could trust our daughter. Sarah had good days and bad days. Jessica knew which were which. "And your daughter timed the financial exploitation for your wife's bad days?" "Exactly." Jennifer approved our Medicaid application, which would cover $2,800 a month toward Sarah's care costs. It wasn't enough to cover Maria's full-time hours, but it helped stop the financial bleeding. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings continued. In April, Michelle Roberts called me with unexpected news. "Stephen, Andrew's attorney, has approached us about a plea deal. He wants to testify against Jessica in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What kind of deal?" "He'd plead guilty to all charges and provide full testimony about Jessica's role in planning the scheme. In exchange, we'd recommend 12 years instead of the 25 to 30 he's facing if convicted at trial." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. What does this mean for Jessica's case? It makes conviction almost certain. Andrew's testimony, combined with the electronic evidence, would be overwhelming. Jessica would likely face 15 to 20 years. Take the deal. Andrew's guilty plea hearing happened in May. I attended to watch him admit, under oath, to everything they'd done. When the judge asked if he understood that he was giving up his right to trial, Andrew nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I want to take responsibility for my actions and help ensure justice for Mrs. Henderson." It was a calculated move to look sympathetic before sentencing, but I didn't care about his motivations. What mattered was that he'd testify against Jessica. His testimony during the plea hearing was devastating. He described in detail how Jessica had planned the entire scheme, how she'd researched the legal requirements for power of attorney documents, how she'd found a notary who didn't ask questions, how she'd calculated the timing around my mother's stroke. "Jessica told me that her mother's dementia made her the perfect target," Andrew testified. "She said confused elderly people make ideal fraud victims because they can't remember exactly what they signed or when they signed it." Hearing my daughter described as a predator who targeted her own mother was almost unbearable. Jessica's attorney tried to argue that Andrew's testimony was unreliable because he was only cooperating to reduce his own sentence. But the electronic evidence backed up everything he said. The text messages, the internet searches, the financial records, it all corroborated his account. As the September trial date approached, Michelle Roberts and I met regularly to prepare my testimony. She walked me through the questions she'd ask and warned me about what Jessica's attorney would try to do on cross-examination. "Stephen, they're going to argue that Jessica was desperate, that she was trying to help you with Sarah's care costs, that the basement confinement was never intended to cause serious harm. They'll paint her as a loving daughter who made terrible decisions under pressure. What about the text messages where she called it tragic accident if Sarah died? We'll present those, but they'll argue it was just dark humor or venting frustration. They'll say Jessica never actually intended for Sarah to die. But she did intend it. She researched accidental death scenarios, I know. And a jury will see that too. But you need to be prepared for them to attack your character as well. They'll ask why you left a dementia patient alone with someone else for 2 weeks. They'll suggest you were negligent in your duty to protect Sarah. That possibility kept me awake at night. Had I been negligent? Should I have known better than to trust Jessica? Should I have canceled my trip to Dallas and stayed with Sarah myself? Dr. Martinez, Sarah's neurologist, assured me that my decision was reasonable. "Stephen, at the time you left, Sarah's dementia was mild to moderate. She was capable of supervised independence with a trusted family member. You had no reason to suspect Jessica would exploit her. But guilt doesn't respond to logic." I kept replaying every conversation with Jessica, looking for warning signs I'd missed. 2 weeks before trial, Jessica's attorney made one last attempt at a plea bargain. She'd plead guilty to elder abuse and financial exploitation in exchange for 8 years in prison. Michelle Roberts called to discuss it. "Stephen, it's your decision. If we go to trial, she'll likely get 15 to 20 years if convicted. But there's always risk with a jury." I didn't hesitate. No deal. She needs to face the maximum consequences for what she did. The trial began on September 15th, exactly 1 year and 1 day after I'd found Sarah in our basement. The irony wasn't lost on me. The courthouse was packed again. Elder abuse cases involving family betrayal have a way of capturing public attention, especially when the details are as shocking as ours. I'd received dozens of letters from strangers expressing support, other families sharing their own stories of financial exploitation, and even some hate mail from people who thought I was being too harsh on my mentally ill daughter. Michelle Roberts opened with a methodical presentation of the evidence. She walked the jury through the timeline, the financial records, the text messages, and the physical evidence from the basement. When she displayed photos of the bucket Sarah had been forced to use as a toilet, several jurors looked sick. "Ladies and gentlemen," Roberts said in her closing argument for the prosecution's opening, "this case is about the most fundamental betrayal imaginable. The defendant didn't just steal money from her parents. She exploited her mother's cognitive vulnerability, imprisoned her in inhumane conditions, and was prepared to let her die to cover up her crimes. This isn't a case about a desperate daughter making bad decisions. This is a case about calculated cruelty." Jessica's attorney, Patricia Mills, tried to paint Jessica as a victim of circumstances. "My client made terrible decisions under extreme financial pressure. She was drowning in debt. Her marriage was falling apart due to her husband's gambling addiction, and she panicked. What happened to Mrs. Henderson was tragic, but it wasn't attempted murder. It was the desperate act of a woman who saw no other way out." The first major witness was Andrew Martinez. He'd been transferred from state prison to testify, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in custody. His testimony was devastating and detailed. "Jessica planned everything," he said, looking directly at the jury. "She researched the laws, found the notary, calculated the timing. She told me that her mother's dementia made her the perfect victim because she wouldn't remember signing documents and her father would trust Jessica completely." "Did Ms. Henderson express any concern about her mother's welfare during the basement confinement?" Roberts asked. "No. When I asked what would happen if her mother got sick or died down there, Jessica said it would just be a tragic accident, and that her father would never suspect his precious daughter of anything criminal." Jessica's cross-examination of Andrew was brutal, but ineffective. Mills tried to paint him as the manipulative mastermind, but the electronic evidence contradicted her every argument. Then came Sarah's testimony. "At 56, my wife looked 70. The stress and trauma had aged her dramatically. Patricia Williams, the victim's advocate, sat with her for support. Sarah's testimony was heartbreaking and powerful. Despite her cognitive decline, she was crystal clear about the key events. "Jessica told me the papers were for insurance," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know what insurance papers look like. I was a nurse for 25 years. These had bank account numbers on them. When I said they were wrong, Jessica got angry and said I was too confused to understand anything anymore." "What happened after you refused to sign the papers?" Roberts asked gently. Jessica said Stephen told her to handle our finances and that I needed to trust her. "But Stephen never said that." "Stephen would never say that." Sarah's voice got stronger. "Then Andrew took me downstairs and locked the door. I called for Stephen every day, but he was in Dallas with his mother." Mills' cross-examination was careful but still traumatic for Sarah. She tried to suggest that Sarah's memory was unreliable, that her dementia made her confuse the sequence of events. "Mrs. Henderson, isn't it possible you're confused about when these conversations happened? I know when someone locks me in a dark basement without food or water," Sarah replied with startling clarity. "That's not something you forget, even with dementia." My own testimony felt like an out-of-body experience. I walked the jury through finding Sarah, discovering the evidence, and realizing the scope of the betrayal. Mills tried to attack me for leaving Sarah alone for 2 weeks, suggesting I'd been negligent in my duty to protect her. "Mr. Henderson, don't you think leaving your wife with dementia for 2 weeks was irresponsible? I left her with our daughter, someone Sarah trusted completely, someone I trusted completely. If that's irresponsible, then I'm guilty of loving my daughter too much and trusting her when I shouldn't have." Jessica took the stand in her own defense, which proved to be a catastrophic mistake. Under Robert's cross-examination, she fell apart completely. Miss Henderson, you texted your husband that if your mother died in the basement, it would be a tragic accident. What did you mean by that? Jessica started crying. I was just venting. I never meant for her to get hurt. You removed the light bulb from the basement, didn't you? Yes, but... You padlocked the door from the outside? Yes, but I was going to check on her. When? You were planning to leave for Belize in 3 days. When exactly were you going to check on your mother? Jessica had no answer. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days. When they returned with their verdict, I held my breath. On the charge of elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of unlawful imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was 2 months later. I submitted a victim impact statement that took me weeks to write. Sarah tried to write one too, but her dementia made it impossible. Her neurologist submitted a report documenting how the trauma had accelerated her cognitive decline. Judge Parker read through everything before addressing Jessica directly. Miss Henderson, you are an educated, intelligent woman. You understood the vulnerability of your mother's condition, and you exploited it without conscience. You betrayed not just her trust, but every standard of human decency. This court sees no mitigating factors. You are sentenced to 18 years in state prison. I exhaled. It was over. Jessica is currently at Perryville Women's Prison in Goodyear. She'll be eligible for parole in 12 years. Andrew is serving his 12-year sentence at Lewis Complex. I've never visited either of them, and I never will. The civil lawsuit resulted in a $750,000 judgment against both of them, but we'll never see that money. They don't have it, and they won't have significant assets for decades, if ever. Sarah and I are still here, still fighting this disease together. She's in late-stage dementia now and doesn't recognize me most days, but sometimes in quiet moments she'll look at me and smile, and I know she remembers that she's loved. That's more than Jessica will have for the next 18 years, and honestly, that's the only justice that really matters.